So my friend Gregory Walter recently wrote about the Eucharist, and he says a rather interesting thing. He says, because Jesus Christ, who established the Eucharist, is not actually present as the host of the Eucharist, per se, he's been elided, as it will, by the fact that he isn't there in the same way that he was there when he was at the table in the upper room with the disciples. Because he's been elided, there's no host at the Eucharist, and because there's no host, there's no guests either, because the host gets to define who the guests are. And in the absence of a host, there are also no guests. So, all that's left in the Eucharist is the meal itself, the giving, the serving of that meal, which is a phenomenological insight. If you've ever given any attention to phenomenology, one of the things that Husserl and many other phenomenologists deal with is reduction to givenness, taking out the subject and object and leaving the middle term, the giving itself. And I wonder what this means in practical terms for the way we think about how we practice Eucharistic hospitality. It means, for example, that although in some ways the presider, like myself, a pastor who stands up there and presides at the table, says some words of welcome, says who can come forward, the baptized, or in our own practice, everyone is welcome, or in some communities, only those who agree to similar doctrinal standards or have gotten to the right age. If indeed there's no host at the meal, if indeed there's no guests at the meal, and it's just the meal itself that's present and there and happening. So here we are, we're at this meal, and it's just happening, and there's no hierarchy, and it's this moment, this community that's happening because of the moment itself. There's something powerful about that. You've been in other moments where something beyond, something super abundant, something powerful is going on. It's almost like the whole moment is saturated in light and shining, and it's no longer about who was doing it or who it's happening to, but it's just more. And that's the Eucharist. It's like this really practical, normal thing. Often it's really not even very fancy, you know. I know Episcopalian communities that like to use port at communion, and some places take the time to bake fancy bread, but half the time it's Mogan David, and a lot of the time it's those wafers that if you're not careful, they stick to the roof of your mouth and you have trouble sucking them off the roof of your mouth so you can swallow them if you have to eat them before you receive the wine. But however you look at it, it's nothing that great, honestly. And yet, you go forward and you stand or you kneel. It gets handed to you. There's some child taking the cups, or there's some person distributing the bread, breaking some off and handing it to you. And there's been the things that happen before you get there, and there's the things that you feel, and suddenly it's all more. And not only that, but it makes us think differently about all the people who have gathered and who haven't gathered there, because it's even more than just you. In that community, it's diachronic, it's across places, it's asynchronous, it happens over time and space. And in each place, it's simply happening. And so, by being absent, by being alighted in the very meal that he establishes and distributes, by being away, he makes himself more there, more present. That, or something like it, is what the meal is all about. And specifically, thinking about the meal in these terms as both a topic, not having a solid place in the normal sense of that term, and yet taking place, creates new place, opens space to the new. That's the power of the Eucharist. In actual practice, what that means is I think we should be much more careful than we are at how we build spaces where we plan to host the Eucharist. Because if you can't host it at all, if it's porous, and if it's mobile, and if it's all the things that we think the Eucharist actually is, not taking up place expansively, but taking place in the give and take between that which is given and received and the giving itself, then the Eucharist is like on a journey, or can take place anywhere, and may especially take place where it doesn't take up place. That's what I got this morning while I'm walking the dog.